Good morning. My name's Adam Sullivan, and I was recently appointed acting Nevada State Engineer on December 1st when Tim Wilson retired. I'm pleased to be here this morning to provide this update from the state. My primary intent is to present an overview of what we anticipate for the upcoming legislative session with regard to water bills. But I also want to take this opportunity to discuss some of the current priorities in the state engineer's office and my approach coming into the job. I've been fortunate to work with many of you over the years and to learn from the diversity of experts in water resources throughout our state. And many of my mentors are in the audience today, and I'm greatly appreciative of all of you. This NWRA forum provides such a valuable opportunity to communicate water issues in a professional but relaxed atmosphere, to promote networking and continuing education, and to find common ground with colleagues who are puzzling through similar issues from different perspectives. My intention, as long as I'm in this role, is to continue active engagement with NWRA, to promote ongoing professional development for all of us working to conserve Nevada's water resources. Most of the problems that we face today are not new. There are no easy solutions, and so innovation and compromise will be required well into the future. We inherit a legacy that has been guided by water law, the best available science, and localized circumstances, but we also benefit from constantly improving science and data that we can learn from to take measures to be best prepared for the future. The job of the state engineer in many ways is to bridge past state engineers with future state engineers and to work cooperatively with experts throughout the state and to carry out water law in a documented and responsible way. My background is in hydrologic sciences, and I tend to address problems from a science-based perspective, but I fully recognize that problems may well go beyond the science. A diversity of perspectives must be taken into account to make the best decisions and prevent unintended consequences. Miles Davis, the jazz great, famously said, "First you imitate, then you innovate." And I love that quote as a reminder to learn from those who've come before us and to think critically about our own perspective. But on the other hand, when a problem is clear and the means to address it are available, then to put it off just makes it worse down the line. So to strike a balance, I want to be as open and clear as I can about my intentions for immediate priorities for our office and the longer-term initiatives that I intend to pursue. First of all, our office is committed to following through on local or regional water resource issues that we've been involved in and require continued action. At the forefront, conjunctive management of surface water and groundwater in the Humboldt River region, over-appropriation of groundwater in the Lower White River flow system, and protection of senior decreed rights, critical management area designation in Diamond Valley, and working with the community to support groundwater management options. These are subject areas that we've talked about at NWRA for years. These are prominent examples of complex water resource dilemmas with very significant impacts on the communities involved, and where the outcome developed at the local level will in some ways set precedent for other parts of the state. Again, I just want to express my commitment that our office will continue to follow through on our obligations to the best of our abilities. Like so many others, our office has experienced a lot of retirements in recent years, and with that, the loss of some institutional knowledge. At the same time, we have a lot of new, smart, and motivated staff that will more than make up for it and continue to fulfill the public service obligations of our office. Internally, we have a commitment to ongoing staff development and support, to share knowledge and cultivate a new generation of experts. I know that many of you who frequently work with our staff can appreciate how important it is to preserve and enhance this expertise. I wouldn't have taken this job if not for the confidence that I have in our staff to collectively meet the demands of the division. Right now, we have a pressing need to modernize some of our internal processes to preserve historic records, digitize our files, and enhance our use of technologies that can help us work smarter. We're running out of space for paper records, and the accumulating history of decisions can too easily be overlooked when addressing immediate questions. Modernizing is essential for improving public service and to provide our staff with the tools they need to evaluate current questions with as much historic context as possible to support defensible decisions. We've made many improvements in recent years with GIS, digital access to files, and providing more services through our website, but we still have a continued need to enhance these capabilities. This is essential to preserve the functions of the division into the future, given our limitations with budget, staffing, and physical space. Another area where I see a glaring need is to update the foundational science that we rely upon to make determinations of long-term water availability. Much of the data that we use to understand regional groundwater flow systems and perennial yield is based on USGS studies that are 50 to 70 years old. Not that it's bad science, but it is dated and is increasingly being challenged. That's why I'm strongly supporting the Water Resource Initiative that was the subject of the panel on Monday. Updating water budget studies using current methods is a critical first step. Using this baseline science to understand long-term water availability is critical for our state, particularly given the continued warming trend and greater climate extremes that we're in the midst of and are forecasted to continue. We're fortunate to have world-class hydrologic research institutions based in Nevada in the USGS Water Science Center and the Desert Research Institute to help navigate these problems from a non-biased scientific perspective. I intend to do what I can to continue a cooperative relationship between these research institutions and the state. There are a number of other critical responsibilities our division is facing in the near future with very limited resources. For instance, the structural integrity of aging dams creates a public safety liability that can too easily be deferred. Secondly, improperly abandoned wells are a gradually increasing hazard that can be a risk to groundwater quality. Another example is unadjudicated claims of vested rights that leave an uncertainty which is increasingly difficult to resolve as time goes by. To be effective as a state agency into the future, we will need to maintain continued outreach and cooperation with local communities and be a partner in finding common sense solutions to address local water resource issues within the framework of state law. State records need to be an accessible and reliable resource for counties and cities to develop water resource plans based on a common baseline of water budget data and resource commitments. Building cooperative relationships and sharing good data is a goal that I intend to keep working towards in incremental steps. This brings me to the main point of this presentation, which is what we anticipate for this upcoming legislative session. As I speak today, there's so much uncertainty about how the session will be run and what the priorities and budget realities will be. We've been working on a number of proposals and concepts to potentially bring forward, but it still remains to be seen what might develop into legislative action or will just be more of a discussion about priorities for the state in water resource conservation. My hope is to make the case to our representatives of the need for updates in water budget studies and the digitization of our records and dam safety, all of which are budget proposals that may or may not see the light of day. With regard to policy proposals that don't cost money, we've made a concerted effort in the last few months to discuss any proposals in advance with those who would potentially benefit from them or be opposed to them, to work through any problems or try to reach a consensus on what would ultimately be the most fruitful path forward. In particular, we've discussed two separate program concepts that are intended to provide some flexibility to water right holders to address problems that we don't have a good answer to. The first program is a conservation credit program for irrigation water rights that would help to incentivize non-use of water where it's not needed, rather than overuse to prevent forfeiture or cancellation. This would be a totally voluntary program and is modeled after a similar one in Oregon. A portion of the unused water right would go into a conservation status and be protected from the requirement to file extensions as long as it wasn't in use. and another portion would be withdrawn or relinquished and could not be used. A second component of this bill draft is to create the authority to have an account that could be used to buy back water rights in overappropriated basins. Not to fund it, but just to create the option. This is a concept that has been proposed frequently over the years, and the idea here is to have a mechanism to implement it if the money were ever available. So the second program is a water banking and leasing program that also provides some flexibility to irrigators by allowing a local community to establish a water bank in which unused water rights could be deposited, again protected from cancellation and forfeiture as long as they weren't used, and then leased out for other uses, such as for temporary needs or for in-stream flows, with the original owner retaining title to the base right. This is modeled after a program in Utah, and I believe we'll hear a presentation on it at this conference. So both of these two programs bring up a lot of questions about how it could provide real benefits in different parts of Nevada, or how it might be taken advantage of or misused. Discussing these concepts with others to get different perspectives has brought out several improvements or constraints that we hadn't thought of, and are certainly things that will need to be worked through. We don't know if these two programs will be brought up for consideration in the session, because the original drafts were withdrawn by the governor's finance office and then reassigned as budget proposals, which go through a different process. So there isn't a BDR number yet, and we don't know exactly what the process will be. We also need to be cautious about moving forward with these unless we have sound examples of how this would benefit the resource and local communities and have really vetted the different viewpoints. So regardless of whether these two bills move forward in this session, the concepts are still out there to conceptualize and discuss for future consideration of ways to incentivize conservation and provide some common sense flexibility within the prior appropriation system. Similarly, there remain many outstanding questions from recent legislative debate about implementing the conjunctive management statute for hydraulically connected surface water and groundwater sources, as well as mitigation of senior rights by junior appropriators. These and other difficult topics need to be worked out over time with broad public participation. My approach right now on subjects like conjunctive management and mitigation is to really focus on local areas that are actually working on real problems where this comes into play, and let the successes or failures inform any potential changes in the water law that could then help resolve or prevent similar problems in other parts of the state. There are a couple of other bill drafts that have been introduced by our office. AB 5 would amend the statutory language regarding appeals of decisions of the state engineer, principally to add clarity that appealable decisions of the state engineer are those that are formal orders, rulings, or decisions that are a final determination. In recent years, the division has seen an increase in litigation over non-final decisions, advisory or general opinions that are part of the deliberative process, rather than a final decision affecting somebody's interests. And AB 5 also clarifies that an appeal of a decision of the state engineer is in the nature of a civil appeal, meaning that there's a limitation on the introduction of new evidence and testimony that wasn't previously introduced at the time a decision was rendered. AB 6 is a cleanup bill that would amend the statute governing one-year temporary change applications of an existing water right. So temporaries are a standard allowable means for water to be provided on a short-term basis for immediate need. And the amendment would make it clear that if a change app is protested, then the state engineer would have the discretion of whether or not to hold a hearing. This is just the same as any other water right application before the state engineer, and was clearly the intent of the legislature when enacting this statute. But the way it's written now is ambiguous, so we seek to clean that up. There are 3 other bill drafts that were not introduced by our office, but would have some effect on us and on the broader water resources community if adopted. AB 15 would amend an existing statute that allows for the creation of a county groundwater board. The purpose of the board is to review and provide recommendations on any action of the state engineer, including any application to appropriate groundwater, any change application, any notice of intent to drill a well, any regulation, any order. So this is something that dates back to the 1950s and 60s when a groundwater board was created in Las Vegas prior to construction of the first pipeline that imported water from Lake Mead. The state engineer was issuing revocable rights for groundwater with the understanding that it would eventually be replaced by Colorado River supply. So working with the groundwater board was helpful to know where the new municipal system was planned to serve. And then once the pipeline was constructed in the early 1970s and the job of the board was done, the board dissolved itself. So since then, the statute hasn't been used anywhere else in a county within the state. And again, I haven't had any involvement in the proposal to amend the statute, and I can't speak to the intentions of doing so in today's world. There's another proposal to add the state engineer as an appointed member of the Colorado River Commission. The CRC has a formal duty to oversee Nevada's apportionment of Colorado River water. And currently, SNWA is the entity that has the resources and the expertise and the authority as delegated by the CRC to fulfill this duty. Historically, the state engineer was a member of the CRC, but hasn't been involved in recent decades. And the intent here is to reenact that relationship to some extent. The third proposal would amend the required qualifications of the state engineer. Current requirements are that the person must be a licensed professional engineer and, quote, have such training in hydraulic and general engineering and such practical skill and experience as shall fit that person for the position, end quote. The intent here is to make amendments to that, to acknowledge that the job today is different than it was 100 years ago and requires some additional capabilities in such areas as public administration, water law, and hydrogeology. So again, these last 3 proposals did not originate from our office. And at this time, I don't have the intention of taking a position before any legislative discussion, except to provide some context or perspective if it's requested. In closing, given the current circumstances going into this legislative session, we're especially uncertain which, if any, water bills will be taken up for consideration. But my intent here is to give an overview of some of the subjects that may be heard and debated, either in this session or in the future. And with that, I hope I've given us a good overview, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be here today at NWRA. I'm pleased that we've been able to hold this virtual conference, and I think that we have time for some questions and discussion. Thank you.